going to die? And how can I worship a God who suffered and who died? Here's one response we might give. We might say that the idea of God coming and suffering and dying is vicious, sadomasochistic, and repellent. We should also dismiss it as barking mad, but for its ubiquitous familiarity which has dulled our objectivity. If God wanted to forgive our sins, why not just forgive them without having himself tortured and executed in payment? Richard Dawkins, probably the most famous atheist in the world, his home less than a mile from our RZIM office in Oxford. That's what he thinks about this idea of God coming and suffering and dying. Now, you won't be surprised to hear that tonight I'm going to offer a different take on Jesus' death, but not without admitting that this can be legitimately confusing. Christians say Jesus died for you, but what does that actually mean? Why is it the case that the cross, that Jesus' death is so central to the Christian message? Why do many Christians wear crosses around their necks? You can go to church every week, every Sunday for years, for your entire life, and you still might not be able to answer that question. If someone asked you the question, why is Jesus' death so central to the Christian message? And I mean, when you think about it, it's very odd. If I walked in tonight and you saw me wearing a 14-karat gold electric chair around my neck, or a sterling silver guillotine around my neck, what would you do? You'd grab your bags and you'd head for the door, and on your way out, you'd turn to your friends and you'd say, I just remembered I'm not allowed to hang out with crazy people. And that's what I thought when I got to college. I thought Christianity was crazy. I thought it was for people who didn't think hard enough. When I first read the Bible, I was reading it to try to disprove it, and I would add things, and I would cross things out. That's where I started. My views changed radically for a number of reasons. First of all, because I did read through the Bible, and when I encountered the life of Jesus in the Gospels, I just couldn't believe the life that I was reading about. A life of grace and humility, the way Jesus treated people, the way he loved people, the generosity, the graciousness, the way he looked at people, the way he spoke to people, the way he touched people. And I thought, I've never seen a life like this. And then I came across all the things that Jesus said about himself. I am the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father but through me. To have seen me is to have seen the Father. That our eternal destiny is caught up in what we believe and whether we trust this one man. And I'm thinking, who is this guy who's lived this incredible, holy, pure life and makes these remarkable claims about himself? And that was enough to get me to start to take the intellectual case for Christianity seriously. And you've thought a lot about this throughout this week. And for me, that history of the resurrection, the miracle of the resurrection, it became absolutely central. And I started to look into this. I couldn't believe there even could be a case for this, let alone a case as compelling as it is. The fact that we can be historically confident that there were many people, hundreds of people, who are walking around after Jesus has been clearly killed, utterly confident that they had spent time with this man, not just seen him, but spent substantial time for him for weeks afterwards. I arranged meetings with the two top religion professors at Princeton University where I was studying. And I got together with them and I sat down and I said, you've got to help me understand this. They were not Christians. And I said, how do you explain this history? This man who was supposed to be the Messiah, he was supposed to be a king, and he dies on a cross. And then we have the eruption of Christianity. And all of these people walking around utterly convinced that they were spending time with him after his death. How do you explain that as a non-Christian? And one of those professors glanced without conviction towards a mass hallucination theory, which is riddled with problems. It's earned no credibility in the scholarly literature. The other one of those professors told me that as a historian, he simply wasn't interested in the question. And the assumption seemed to be that as soon as we begin talking about the miraculous, we're no longer talking about history. And I've never been able to understand why he thought that, why he thought he could just make that assumption before even having the conversation, rather than deciding whether or not a miracle happened based on the evidence. And I came to the conclusion that only the miraculous resurrection of Jesus could fit with the history. Chuck Colson, He said that he believes in the resurrection because of Watergate. Some of you might have to look that up later. Now, as I say that, I realize that. But he said, with Watergate, he said 12 of the most powerful people in the world couldn't keep a lie for 3 weeks to save their backsides. And you're telling me that not only the 12 disciples, but hundreds of others remained staunchly convinced that they had spent time with this person, Jesus, after he had clearly been killed for their entire lives, even though they weren't getting anything out of it. In fact, they were being persecuted and killed for it. Every one of them either killed for it or sent into exile. He said, no way. No way. The only explanation for that is the actual miraculous resurrection of Jesus. I started looking into these things. And then the other thing for me was that this idea of God coming to die, coming in the person of Jesus, and being willing to lay down his life, being willing to die, it finally started to make sense to me. I came to believe that Jesus' death was actually the greatest expression of God's love for us. And I came to believe that for a number of reasons. They have to do with both how Jesus died and with why he died. Let me start with how he died. Famous atheist, psychologist Sigmund Freud, he once suggested that when you are pushed to your limit, the real you comes out. When you're pushed to your limit, the real you comes out. When you're in the greatest pain, at the point of greatest frustration, when you're insulted and stepped on, and then stepped on again, that's when you find out something about who someone really is. What comes out of me in those times is not very attractive. What came out of Jesus was love and compassion and forgiveness. The Roman judge that tried him found no basis for a charge against him. The Jewish leaders demanded that he be killed because he had claimed to be God. And so they took him and they beat him and they stripped him and they strung him up on a cross to slowly die, one of the most painful deaths and most humiliating deaths possible. And from that cross, as he hung there, he looked down at the people who were murdering him, and he said, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." And if Jesus forgave even then we can be absolutely assured that there is no sin that he will not forgive if we will just ask. And then from the cross, Jesus looked to his mother, and he looked to his good friend, and then he said to them, "Mother, here is your son," and to the disciple, "Here is your mother." And from that time on, this disciple took her into his home. Even as he hung dying, Jesus' concern was not first and foremost for his own life. It was for the life of his mother and for making sure that she would be cared for after he was gone. And then one of the criminals who was being executed alongside Jesus, he began to heap insults at him. He said, "Aren't you the Messiah? Save yourself and us." But the other criminal on Jesus' other side, he rebuked him. He said, "Don't you fear God? We are punished justly, for we are getting what our deeds deserve. But this man has done nothing wrong." Then he said, "Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom." And Jesus answered him, "Truly I tell you, today you will be with me in paradise." The final thing that Jesus did on the cross as he struggled to take his final breaths was to care for the man next to him, a criminal, and to assure him salvation in response to his humble heart and his trust in him. When the centurion who stood there and saw how Jesus died, he said, "Surely this man was the Son of God." When they saw how Jesus died, they knew that he was God. Because when you're pushed to your limit, the real you comes out. And what came out of Jesus when he was pushed to his limit was absolutely divine. Why was Jesus so perfect in death? Why did he die with such utter integrity? And I think it's because it's why he came in the first place. There's no notion in Christianity of Jesus being forced to come and die. As God himself, Jesus chose to come and live a human life. He chose to come and suffer a human death. He says, "No one takes my life from me, but I lay it down of my own accord. But why would he do that? Why would he voluntarily choose to come and suffer and die? And I just want to begin to sketch 3 reasons why he might come and do that. And the first one is to do sometimes the one and only thing that really makes a difference to someone when they're in the midst of terrible suffering, to come and join them in their pain and to be willing to suffer alongside them. When I was about 6 years old, I was out playing football on my next-door neighbor's front lawn, and I was getting knocked around pretty good. I was playing with older kids. I started crying. There's 6-year-old Vince. And I came running home to my mom, who was standing out on the front porch, sporting the classic 80s onesie, which none of you remember either. And I come running home crying to my mom. And the words that are coming out of my mouth, I'm saying, I'm not tough enough. I'm not tough enough. And so what does my mom do? My mom does what any loving mother of a 6-year-old son would do. She positioned herself like this. She got in quite an athletic stance. She hung her nose out in the air, and she looked at me lovingly, and she said, "Punch me in the nose. You are tough enough. Punch me in the nose." True story. Crazy Italians. And I did. I just looked at her like she was crazy, but she persisted. She said, "Punch me in the nose. Punch me in the nose. You are tough enough. Punch me in the nose." And I don't know what sort of psychological state I must have been in, but finally, I actually did. I reared back, beginning of my boxing career. And I gave my mom a straight right hand to the nose. And to my astonishment, and to her astonishment, blood actually began coming out of my mom's nose and began to drip down her face. Can you believe Joe married into this family? Then came one of the just most gorgeous images from my childhood, probably the most memorable image from all of my childhood. Through this blood that's coming down my mom's face comes the most dazzling, just radiant, joyful smile. And my mom says, "Now get back out there." And mom sent me back out into that game, and she went inside to get cleaned up. Now, you might not know what to make of that story. Understandably so. What a bizarre thing for my mom to do. What a barking mad thing to do. What an unthinkable, messy, bloody thing for her to do. But I also think, in at least one sense, what an extravagant display of love. My mom chose to bring me into this world, and she knew that there would be suffering. But that didn't make her evil. Why not? Because when the suffering came and my eyes filled with tears, she stepped into my suffering with me, even though that meant suffering at the hands of her own child. And that is a picture of Jesus on the cross, where God did something unthinkable and messy and bloody, where God stepped into our suffering, even though that meant suffering at the hands of those that he had created. The night before Jesus died, as he wrestled with what he knew the next day would bring, he said to his friends, he said, "My heart is sorrowful, even to the point of death." I think it's one of the most amazing lines in all of Scripture. My heart is overwhelmed with sorrow, even to the point of death. The God of the universe, the creator of all things, saying he's overwhelmed with sorrow to that point. If you've ever experienced deep depression, if you've ever thought about suicide, whatever it is that you've been through, there is nothing you could go through when Jesus is not right there with you. There is no depth of agony or helplessness that we can experience in this life that he doesn't understand. And what does that say about who we must be to God? To a God who would rather suffer with us than not suffer without us. The Bible talks about God as a loving father. It literally refers to God as a loving father hundreds of times in the Bible. And that is unique to Christianity. The Quran does not refer to Allah as a father even once. The Quran says that Allah hates the prodigal. The prodigal. The prodigal who God the Father sees far off on the horizon and goes running towards like an embarrassing fool. And when he gets to his son, he throws his arms around him and he just falls on him and he kisses him and he gives him a ring and sandals and the best robe in the house, and he throws him a huge, huge party. All faiths are not the same. God's love for you is the love of a loving father, a parent just staring down at a newborn child with absolute delight, with absolute love. Not love because of how impressive you are or how good you are or how many achievements you've had. Love simply because you're a child. There is nothing that you can do to earn that love. There is nothing that you can do to lose that love. Nothing. I hope you hear me say that. The love of a parent staring down at a newborn child. Love simply because he created us. Simply because he made us. Because we're in his image. John Stott was a Christian author who seemed to really understand the love of God. I love this quotation by him. He sums up what I've been saying. He says, "I could never myself believe in God if it were not for the cross. In the real world of pain, how could one worship a God who was immune to it? I have entered many Buddhist temples in different Asian countries and stood respectfully before the statue of the Buddha. His legs crossed, arms folded, eyes closed, the ghost of a smile playing round his mouth, a remote look on his face detached from the agonies of the world. But each time, after a while, I've had to turn away, and in imagination I have turned instead to that lonely, twisted, tortured figure on the cross, nails through hands and feet, back lacerated, limbs wrenched, brow bleeding from thorn pricks, mouth dry and intolerably thirsty, plunged in God-forsaken darkness. That is the God for me. He laid aside his immunity to pain. He entered our world of flesh and blood, tears and death. He suffered for us." At the cross, we see the absolute uniqueness of the Christian response to suffering. In Islam, the idea of God suffering is nonsense. It's thought to make God weak. In Buddhism, to reach divinity is precisely to move beyond the possibility of suffering, to detach yourself from anything or anyone that could cause you suffering. Now contrast that with Jesus Christ, who did everything he possibly could to attach himself to us and to our suffering and to see us through it. They mocked him while he was on the cross. He saved others. Let him save himself. And with the heart of a parent, Jesus responded, "I would rather suffer with my children than leave my children to suffer alone." That's one reason that Jesus came. And now there's the ultimate reason that Jesus came and was willing to die. And that's to save us from our sin. To take our just punishment himself so that we could be free from it. I think sometimes our society works really hard to avoid admitting that we're sinful. I was reminded of this a while back when I applied for a marriage visa to stay in the UK with Joe. And on the official form, in order not to get deported, I had to answer no to this question. Have you or any dependents who are applying with you ever engaged in any other activities that might indicate that you may not be considered to be persons of good character? And I just laughed out loud when I read that. I mean, it might as well have said, have you ever done anything wrong? I think if we want proof that we are sinful, one of the best ways to get that is to turn out the light. Sin is what we do in the dark when no one is watching. Like when you go to the movies to see a film and you get a nice big bucket of popcorn and you walk into the movie theater as a normal human being and then the lights dim and all of a sudden you become a complete slob. I can see from your faces, there's a few of you out there. First, you assume the slob position, you get nice and comfortable, get your popcorn right there, and then you open your mouth wide and you just start flicking the popcorn in the general vicinity of your mouth. just hoping some of it lands in there. Only about half of it does. Or else you take you know you've done this. You take the biggest handful of popcorn possible, and you look at it, and everyone knows there's no way that all of that could possibly fit in your mouth all at once. But you try anyway, and it just falls down your shirt and on your trousers, not the floor. When there's nothing left in your bucket, you just start picking that popcorn off your shirt and your trousers, down the crevices in your seat. No one would do this in the light, only in the dark. You wouldn't do this on a first date, right? You wouldn't say, hey, mind if I try your potato? And then just reach over and toss it in the general vicinity of your mouth and just leave some of it on your shirt for later. Right? You wouldn't do that. Sin is what we do when no one is watching, like drinking out of the bottle or wearing the same refresh t-shirt without washing it over and over and over and over. Picking your nose. Don't look at me like that. 91% of people pick their nose, and over half do so multiple times a day. So if you shook hands with the people on your right and your left at the beginning of this talk, there's a very good chance that one of them owes you an apology. I'll bet you can guess which one. It's amazing what happens when we know that other people can't see what we're doing. And sadly, in my life, the mess that I make, the things that I do in the dark, it's not just the popcorn that misses my mouth, but it's the way that I think about other people. It's the things that I say about them behind their back. It's the way that so often I'm so much more concerned with what's best for me than I am with the needs of others. It's the people that I didn't treat well. There was a boy named Ewan who I used to fight with as a teenager. He wasn't a very nice kid, and I wasn't a very nice kid either. And I can remember taking every opportunity I could to put him down. And I found out a few years ago that he had killed himself, that he had taken his life. And all of a sudden, all of these questions started to come into my mind. And I remembered the verse, "The wages of sin is death." And I had read that hundreds of times before hearing that news. Never was it truly real to me until I heard that news. And I started asking myself, would that have happened had I offered my hand to him rather than using it to push him down? And I didn't know how to answer that question. Sometimes when I try to explain the idea of sin to people, they want to tell me that I'm exaggerating, that really I'm pretty good. It's not like I've killed anyone. And actually, that's a much harder question for me to answer than you might think. And what if God shone a light not just on Ewan, but on the rippling effects of all of my unkind words over the years? I am undoubtedly in need of a Savior. I think sometimes it's hard for us to appreciate the reality of our sin until we encounter someone holier than ourselves. My wife, Jo, she once wrote me out a list of 40 things that no one knew about her that she wanted me to know before we got engaged. Beautiful thing to do. Absolutely traumatizing, but a beautiful thing to do. And so she talked me through this list, and we got down to number 19. And she said, now this one I'm really ashamed of. I really feel I've betrayed your trust here, and I think this may be the worst thing I've ever done to you. And at this point, I'm trying to keep it cool on the outside, but I'm flipping out inside. You can imagine the things that are running through my mind. She's cheated on me. She's going to break up with me. She's a British spy and has to kill me because I know too much. And then Jo explained that one day when we were together and we were looking at pictures on my computer, old pictures from my life, and I took a break to go and answer the front door, she simply continued perusing the files on my computer in order to look at old photos of me. And I thought, oh no, I'm in so much trouble. Photo stalking? That's the worst thing you've ever done to me? I thought I'm in so much trouble. And I didn't show Joe my list of 40 things. I wanted her to marry me. Here's my point. Our sin is magnified by the holiness of the person whose presence we are standing in. That's why I think when the criminal who hung next to Jesus saw the holiness with which Jesus died, he knew that his own punishment was just. That's why in the end, when we all stand before God, a perfectly holy God, no one will have an excuse. Everyone then will be able to recognize their need for a Savior. Oftentimes, my temptation when I do things wrong is to look down the street to find somebody who's done something even worse, to look to the news, find someone who's done even worse, and then I feel better about myself. I think sin's that guy's problem. It's not my problem. But what if the standard is not some guy down the street? What if the standard is not someone who you see on the news? What if the standard is the very heart of God? Now, the incredible news of the Christian faith is that God loved each one of us too much to let us bear the judgment for the sins that we've committed. Now, some of you, like me, have treated other people very badly. Others of you have been treated very badly by others. And the cross is where God says that matters to him. The cross is where God says it's not okay to just look the other way when people are ridiculed, when people are abused, when people are enslaved. It's not okay to say that's no big deal. I heard a while back about a rapist who got 3 months in jail and then was back out on the street. The parents of the victim said, "We thought our little girl was worth more than that." The cross is where God says your little girl is worth more than that, much more. There do have to be serious consequences for sin. God is committed to justice for those who have been wronged. But the cross is also where God says that he can't bear to see any of those that he's brought into this world have to bear those consequences. He loves each one of us too much. And so what does he do? He takes the consequences on himself. He takes the punishment on himself. Justice demands judgment. Love demands mercy. Only at the cross do you find both perfect justice and perfect love in perfect intersection in the death of Jesus. That's why Jesus came. That is why Jesus was so ready to die. In the greatest act of love I've ever heard of, God traded places with us. He took the death that we were headed for, and in its place, he offers a completely clean slate, new life. Listen to these words of hope. Though your sins are like scarlet, they shall be white as snow. As far as the east is from the west, that is how far God has removed our transgressions from us. Complete and utter and unconditional forgiveness. Every single one of us needs that, and there's only one person who offers it. Jesus died for our suffering. He died for our sin. And then lastly, he died for our shame. Just when I thought I had gotten past the worst in Joe's list of 40 things that no one knew about her, she hit me with number 37. It was only 4 words, but it was 4 words that you never expect to hear from your significant other. They were, "I am a Trekkie." Joe loves Star Trek. And this is something, she blames her older brother. And this is something that very few people knew about Joe until I began preaching about it. Oops. She had done a pretty good job of hiding this fact from me early in our dating relationship. And I still think the only reason she told me was because a new Star Trek movie had come out in theaters, so she had to tell me, so I'd take her to see it. She was thinking it might be embarrassing to be a Star Trek fan, but it'd be more embarrassing to go see the Star Trek movie by yourself. So she had to tell me. She read me number 37. I could tell when she did. I know it's just a simple little thing. But I could tell when she did that she thought I would think less of her for it. Okay, she thought it was going to hurt her cool factor. She thought she had some reason to be embarrassed or ashamed. And so we arranged to meet at the movies. And when Joe showed up, I was proudly wearing a t-shirt of Mr. Spock's face. And it said, "Live long and prosper." And I was holding open a massive Star Trek poster, which said, "To boldly go where no man has gone before." And I just, to be honest, I thought I was doing something cute. I thought I was doing something fun. But as Jo approached me, she had tears in her eyes. And then she just threw her arms around me for the biggest hug. And it was at that point that I realized that for me to literally be wearing her embarrassment, somehow it freed her from having to be embarrassed. And I said to her, "I'll never be ashamed of you, and so you never need to be ashamed of yourself." And I think that night, God used a funny t-shirt and a ridiculous poster to teach me and Jo something very significant about himself. When Jesus came, he literally wore our shame. When he came and he put on human flesh, he literally took on himself every time we've been mocked, every time we've been spat on, every time we've failed, every time we've been abused, exposed, ignored, overlooked. When he came and he took on human flesh, he literally wore all of that so that we wouldn't have to wear it anymore. And I don't know about you, but I know for both me and Jo, when we look back on the hardest times in our lives, they tend to be times when we were shamed. Times when someone made fun of us or mocked us or made us feel like we weren't worth the time. Something like that. Sometimes it's just a couple of words, and they stick with you for years. Words that keep coming back. Words that say, "You're not good enough." Words that say, "You're ugly." Words that say that you're not worth the time. And I think today it's even worse for you guys, at least when we were your age. You know, when we got home from school, we'd go upstairs into our bedroom, and at least we knew there we were safe. We weren't going to get shamed or embarrassed. Hey, you guys, as long as you have your phone with you, you can get embarrassed. You got to check Facebook right before you go to sleep, see if anybody's said something about you you wouldn't like them to, and you might wake up the next morning and grab your phone, and you can find out that someone's been shaming you even while you slept. As naked and vulnerable on the cross, Jesus took our sin on himself, but he also took our shame on himself. He hung there naked. He hung there vulnerable. He took on himself every time we've been abused, exposed, ignored, overlooked. And therefore, whatever shame you've been through, it does not need to define you. Hear me say that. Whatever shame you have been through, it does not need to define you, because Jesus joins us in our shame. And in its place, he offers us these promises. Anyone who believes in him will never be put to shame. You will forget the shame of your youth. Instead of your shame, you will receive a double portion. Instead of disgrace, you will rejoice in your inheritance. Everlasting joy will be yours. Do not be afraid. You'll not be put to shame. Do not fear disgrace. You'll not be humiliated. On the cross, Jesus says that whatever it is that you've been through, you don't need to be ashamed of it, because I've been through it too. And he says to us, I will never be ashamed of you, and so you never need to be ashamed of yourself. Why would God choose to come and die? I think to suffer with us when we suffer, to offer us forgiveness for our sins, but also to offer us freedom from our shame. What kind of God would come and die? A God of love, a God who we can trust, a God who says that to him you are worth dying for. And that's how much he loves you. And will you respond by loving him back? A couple of years ago, I was at a conference, and the morning after the conference, I had an extra day, and I decided I'd rent a surfboard, and I paddled out beyond where the waves were breaking, and I was just sitting there waiting to try to catch my first wave. And as I'm sitting there, a shark comes up and rams the bottom of the board. never had an experience like this before. And it sent me flying off the board to the side. I grabbed the board and threw it back under me, and I get my hands and my feet out of the water like this, and I start to paddle away really quickly, but I'm sort of afraid to dig my arms deep into the water, so I'm sort of like paddling away, like this, and my heart rate just spikes from like 80 to 200. And in that moment, amidst that chaos, this is the question that popped into my head, word for word. If this is it, if this is the end of my life on earth, is that all right? If this is it, is that all right? And when I asked that question, it didn't matter how much money I made, didn't matter what grades or degrees I got, didn't matter how successful I am or not, didn't matter how good looking I am, didn't matter what other people think of me, my worldly achievements, none of that mattered. The only thing that mattered in that moment when I asked that question was that Jesus had died for me. The only thing that mattered was that God had done something so loving and so extravagant that I could trust him when he tells me that my death will not be my end. And I tell you the truth, amidst that chaos, on that water, a deep, deep peace came over me as I paddled back in to shore. Do you have that assurance? Do you have that assurance? I'm going to close out the live stream in just a second here. I want you to stay in the place that we are, and we're going to come back to a time of prayer and response here in this room. But if you have joined us on the live stream, I want to thank you. I want to thank you for giving me a hearing. I want to encourage you, if when I ask that question, do you have that assurance? If the answer of your heart was, I don't know, I want to encourage you right now when this live stream ends, just take a minute and pray for that. Ask God to give you that assurance. Ask God to give you that peace that transcends understanding, which would be available to you at any time, and I believe that he will. And can I ask you also, would you pray for us? Before you leave your computer or your phone, would you just take a minute and pray for us?